For many residents along Eglinton, spanning in St. Paul's from Mount Pleasant and Eglinton all the way to Dufferin and Eglinton, and for many of our small businesses in Midtown and especially in Little Jamaica, this has been a cause for great concern. Mental health's been impacted, noise pollution galore, businesses have closed, and we're here tonight to say why. Why has this project started in 2011? Why has it taken this long to complete? Why is there no transparency around the costs of this project, around who's getting paid by who? Why is Metrolinx and Crosslinx suggesting that this project will be done by March of 2023? I mean, they have now sort of said 2024, but really, we're still hearing that there isn't a credible plan of action here to get this complete. So what do we have to do as residents, as small business owners, as stakeholders, as workers, frankly, to take back our Eglinton West and ensure that we're able to travel safely from point A to B? And that's what we're here to talk about. And I'm really glad to be joined with local riders in St. Paul's, with local leaders from St. Paul's, and from workers, and all of you that are watching from home as well, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. So just again, before we start into our one of three conversations, before we open it up to you, where you can submit through the Q&A function on Zoom your questions to any of the people you're going to be listening to tonight. I want us to start in a good way. I'll begin an acknowledgement, then I'll pass to my friend Jill. I am coming to you from the community office in Ottawa Centre, the NPP community office, and that sits on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. And I am forever thankful for their friendship. One of the lessons I've learned from one of our local leaders, Albert Dumont and Claudette Command and others, is that they need to seek the truth. They need to seek the truth and to be honest about where we stand. So I see tonight as a reconciliation act, as an act in good faith of trying to do that, follow through on that lesson my friends have taught me. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you, Joel. I'm joining you from the city of Toronto. Folks, we're on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. Toronto is also covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa brands. Most importantly, Toronto is the dish of one spoon territory. We all eat out of the dish with only one spoon. That means we have to share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, which includes taking care of the land and the creatures we share it with. Importantly, there are no knives at the table, representing that our commitment and actions must be firmly grounded in peace, humanity, equity, access, and social justice. Thank you, Miigwech. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill. All right, so we're going to start tonight by talking to very good friends we are privileged to have from the Amalgamated Transit Workers Union in Ottawa and in Toronto. Folks, if you're tuning in and you do not know who this union is, you are lucky. You're in the right place, because you're going to talk to the people who actually operate our public transit systems, that actually fix them up and make sure they work. And if you want to know how something works, talk to the people who build things, talk to the people who operate things and maintain them. So we're going to start with the Amalgamated Transit Union and many of our friends from ATU. Clint Crabtree, coming to us from Ottawa. Now, Clint, you're the president of ATU Local 279. You've seen the light rail debate, the Confederation line debate, the reaction to the huge inquiry report we've had. And as I understand it, when you've told me, you actually have in the union workers who are working for that particular company, the Rideau Transit Group, that operates the private consortium for the light rail transit line. So if you were to say, how do we start fixing Ottawa's LRT from what you hear from the people who actually maintain the system, what's your first reaction?
How to fix our system? I mean, if you're going to have a system, don't copy our system. That's for sure. Toronto, learn from us. Don't do what we've done. The city has offered no accountability to the Rideau Transit Group or Rideau Transit Maintenance, whatever you want to call the consortium. Alstom is members of our local. We organized Alstom. They're under the consortium. And this has been a complete disaster since day one. I mean, the delay, the reliability of this Confederation line has been a complete disaster. We can't say enough of learn from the mistakes. There's been a public inquiry in Ottawa of everything that went on, and Toronto and everybody else out there that is going to put something like this out, please learn from Ottawa. I mean, my members, the public, everybody suffered through this. Just the actual reliability of this has been so bad. We don't know when it is going to run. You're better off letting us know when it's up rather than letting us know when it's down.
Wow.
And I mean, Brian Connolly has been a wealth of knowledge on this as well. I mean, he's actually more in depth on everything that's gone on in Ottawa and everything that's going to be going on in Toronto compared to anybody that I know in the Amalgamated Transit Union. Okay. And the delay of a year, we went through possible layoffs at our membership. We're going to lose 500 operators to mechanics to maintenance because of the implementation of LRT. That never came. The stress that my membership suffered, and then the ongoing stress that the public is suffering today is unbelievable. And the only thing that I can say out of this, and there's so much I could talk about this all night long about everything that's gone on, but we need to learn from these mistakes. We need to put taxpayers' money first over making profits for these private consortiums. That's the most important thing out of this, and everybody's got to learn from this.
Clinton, in a second, I'm going to throw to Jill to talk to Marvin and Brian, some of our friends from ATU 113 in Toronto. But the other day you mentioned to me that it's kind of frustrating to be in a situation that whenever this product doesn't work, it's not Rideau Transit Group that has to answer the calls that's in the news, that has to deal with angry potential people getting frustrated for getting off that train and getting onto an R1 supplementary bus that's taken out of bus service, so other people are delays. It's ATU members. So what are you hearing from members when they're put in that kind of a situation?
Well, I mean, they're upset. I mean, you know what? The scheduling issues that this has caused for the actual bus operators, and not only the bus operators, but the train operators that have to deal with the public being frustrated and not knowing where to go when the train is down. There's a lack of accountability, and it's continuing, and nothing has been resolved. And it just seems to continue, and nothing is getting better. I mean, this thing is down it's down a lot, and everybody knows that. I mean, we're almost the embarrassment of LRT everywhere, or we are the embarrassment of LRT everywhere. And you know, my members throughout this whole thing, they've been going through the pandemic and the LRT disaster. So they've been getting hit every which way, and not to mention the public too. I mean, the public in Ottawa has suffered through this, not knowing whether or not that train's going to show up. You're relying on it, and thank God that, as we all know, Ottawa is a big government town, and a lot of our ridership is government and federal workers downtown in the downtown core. And thank God that, you know what, everybody wasn't back to work and working 5 days a week, because I don't know what type of a disaster we'd be involved in if everybody was back to work full time, working 5 days a week, because the reliability of this train is it's absolutely disgusting.
Fair enough. Jill, I'm going to throw it to you. Talk to our friends from Toronto.
First of all, thank you so much, Clint, for those very frank words. I'm going to ask Marvin and Brian for a few comments as well. I'll start with Brian, actually, because I remember meeting Brian several years ago, back in was it 17 or 18? And Brian had his shirt on, Keep Transit Public, you know, and it certainly got me motivated to learn about why it's so important for us to demand the dollars from our government to ensure that our transit is working, that it's operating, that workers are taken care of, that we're safe, which we know is a very significant issue facing us right now today in the news. So I'd like to know, Brian, from you, why is it so important that we keep transit public? Why are P3s a potential disaster when it comes to doing just that, keeping our workers safe, keeping the project safe, ensuring that they're working properly, that they're properly tested. What's the conflict of interest there, and is there one with P-Thieves?
There's a severe conflict of interest because private companies are in the business to make profit. They're not in the business to provide a service. And we're seeing that also happening right now with our healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened in Ottawa is the exact same maintenance contractors, SNC Lavalin, Alstom, ACS Infrastructure, they're contracted to maintain the Eglinton Crosstown for the next 30 years once it's up and running. There is no accountability. City of Ottawa just reached a settlement yesterday with the Rideau Transit Group, and the terms of that settlement are remaining confidential as they claim it's solicitor client and settlement privilege. That Ottawa Confederation Line LRT opened 436 days late. It was taken out of service for 3 months after 2 train derailments. It was then down for 4.5 days due to an overhead lightning strike on the wires.
Okay.
And then just recently, the beginning of January, it was out of service for 6 days when ice buildup on the lines caused the power lines to come down, and 4 trains got stuck for 6 days. You've never seen the Toronto subway system down for 6 days or 4 days, because when it comes to public infrastructure and publicly controlled and maintained, we have the manpower and the resources to immediately deal with any maintenance issues. But because private companies operate on profit first, they have minimal staff, minimal training, and they pay their workers very much a minimum wage. So they don't attract the quality, knowledgeable workers.
So now, oh, sorry about that, Brian.
Sorry.
Keep going.
So
No,
now,
keep going.
when you're talking with community groups, business groups, especially in Ottawa, the big argument right now is bringing the federal civil service workers back to the office. They're being legislated back. So same thing is going to happen in downtown Toronto. The business groups and John Tory are now going to start legislating the banks and Bay Street and everybody else to start bringing people back downtown because the businesses are suffering downtown. But how can we do that when we have unreliable transit? And now we have a severe safety problem where there is a lot of violence in the Toronto transit system. A lot of it has to do with removing staff, TTC staff, unionized workers, and regular staff from the transit system by cutting their jobs, cutting service. Passengers are now getting frustrated and upset. They're upset with one another. They're upset at TTC, and the violence is now becoming out of control. It's a very negative chain.
Thank you very, very much, Brian, for those words and for your staunch advocacy on this issue. Here in St. Paul's, we have 8 of the LRT stops that will directly service our community. They're certainly not servicing us now because they're not up and running. But I'd like to turn to the president of ATU Local 113, Marvin. Thank you for being here. I know you've had a very busy day, and I certainly appreciate your comments. And as always, your honesty in those comments. Thoughts and prayers simply do not go far enough, right? Whether we're talking about labor rights, workers' rights, which include health and safety, ensuring that people can get home after a day's work, these are all important issues. I wonder if you can speak to the impact on the impact of P3s on public sector workers, because from what I understand, P3s tend to contract they often outsource good public sector jobs to for-profit operators. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how that impacts workers, or if there are any impacts on their safety, et cetera. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Speaking on P3s and the impact for workers, we know that they believe in savings over safety. We know that everything motivated by a third-party profit and everything else is secondary, including safety of workers, the well-being of workers. Everything is a grind to try to put pressure on people and not deliver what they're supposed to be delivering. Right now, I think the accountability and transparency is secondary to maintaining profit. We know that they're running scared and trying to have accountability. And that's why I think it's beautiful that we're here to try to maintain that. The public right now, I don't think gives the government and these agencies that are providing these private partnerships the benefit of the doubt. We should be getting the benefit of the doubt, and we're working on that right now. The public understands that we're working in their interests and that we want accountability and transparency and the way public dollars are spent in the best interest of the public rather than the private partnerships that are siphoning money away from the public. If we can speak to it right now with what we've experienced regarding the violence in transit that we're dealing with Toronto, if you allow me to have a bit of a personal moment with what's going on.
Absolutely.
This is a symptom. This is a symptom of what happens with private interests, with what's going on. They're grinding away and alienating the public from the service they're supposed to provide. We're putting pressure on. They have service going to be declining, and they're going to put pressure on these private interests put pressure on service, and we are the frontline workers that will be incurring the wrath of people not getting the service that they paid for, which leads to acts of violence and frustration on transit workers. It leads to violence and frustration on the public itself. We need these things to stop, and hopefully we have our allies that hear us with what's going on and try to work in their best interest and get the oversight needed to try to get these projects to be fully transparent, fully accountable to the public. There's a reason why they're hiding the figures and the facts, because it does not work in their best interest. And hopefully moments like this continue to happen and we get to call them out and have them actually address the shortcomings and have it corrected. We want public transit to remain public, not just for ourselves, but it's in the best interest of everybody, including the taxpayers. My concern is if we allow these private entities to control things, there'll be a deterioration of service, it'll cost more down the road. Ultimately, the people that are the stakeholders that are making these decisions will not be around and be accountable, and we will be left holding the bag yet again. We will be the ones dealing with the cost overruns and then the shortfalls. And where do they find efficiencies? In labor. We will be bearing the brunt of it. The public will be bearing the brunt of it with service delays, or as Brian said, no service at all. And who is the person that made that decision? They're not accountable, and nobody holds them to account and has them actually have to deal with what they've done. Unfortunately, they get to walk away with a bonus, walk away and retire with millions of dollars of profit and escape, or get a promotion, or get elected somewhere and not be held accountable. So I'm very happy to be here to try to help illustrate with what's going on. And no offense, but we don't want what happened in Ottawa coming here. No offense, Clint. Right? We want to learn from the experience in what happened in Ottawa and not have that come here. We have that wisdom. And in order for them to still do it, it shows they truly do not care with what's going on providing transit.
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Joel.
Oh, sorry, Jill, didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say, Ethan from our team who set up tonight. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you. Everybody helped set this event up tonight. This is from the hard work of people who work for our offices that made all of this happen. Ethan, I'm wondering, before we go to the national office of ATU and our friend Eric Tuck, Pride of Hamilton, with us here tonight, I'm wondering if, who is the Vice President of ATU Canada, could you play a video clip? Because we wanted Infrastructure Ontario, Metrolinx, and OC Transport to come here tonight to help us answer some of these questions that people are going to have. We didn't hear from Infrastructure Ontario. We didn't hear from OC Transport. We did hear from Mr. Phil Verster of Metrolinx. Apparently he's otherwise engaged. He's not available tonight. But we did manage to splice together some video of Infrastructure Minister King Asurma commenting on the transit projects that are currently being built in Ontario, and Michael Lindsay, who's the CEO of Infrastructure Ontario. So let's, for our collective benefit, so we understand the pitch for what we're talking about. Ethan, would you mind playing that clip before we go to Eric?
Can folks see my screen?
We sure can.
Excellent. I will play.
The past few years have presented significant challenges worldwide, Ontario's construction sector being no exception. The pandemic not only increased pressures on the sector, but uncovered new and emerging issues such as inflation, labor and supply chain shortages, and market volatility that have all posed significant barriers to delivering projects. Despite these challenges, we never slowed down and kept shovels in the ground on our priority projects, redefining what it means to be resilient. We recently procured 7 subway packages and are making rapid progress on the Eglinton Crosstown West extension with the 2 tunnel boring machines, Rennie and Rexy, digging more than 6 kilometers of tunnels for the future line that will make life more convenient for residents.
Everywhere I go in the continent, and I'm privileged to do that on behalf of the people of the province of Ontario, I find jurisdictions that are looking to Ontario for inspiration and example. Together, we have created the jurisdiction with a reputation for transparency, dependability, and innovation when it comes to delivering public works. Everybody is trying to do what Ontario has been doing, my friends, for these past 10 to 15 years. And that is a function of our collaboration, as the minister said. It's our ability to talk to one another about the way in which we do things, but also to hear some difficult truths, to internalize what those are, and to reimagine the best way to ultimately bring these assets not only to market and to delivery, but also to maintain them for the good of the people of Ontario. It hasn't been Infrastructure Ontario or the Ministry of Infrastructure or the Government of Ontario that's created that dynamic. It is all of us together.
Thank you very much, Ethan. Okay, well, Eric, I think you just heard Mr. Lindsay say and Minister Surma that, we're having rapid progress on the Eglinton Crosstown and our transit projects, that Ontario is the envy of the world for dependability, collaboration, that, Mr. Lindsay wants us to face some difficult truths. As someone who's vice president of the ATU, what's your reaction to that?
He also talked about transparency, and as you know, trying to get any information in regards to these P3s is almost like trying to pull teeth. As Brian finally, some of the truths are coming out, and that's the whole idea. We need to shed light on these P3s. The reality is, we built subways back in the 40s and 50s, starting even before then. And we did it very well. We did it with public dollars. Yes, we ran some deficits in order to do it. Those deficits have paid back, tenfold by giving back to those communities, by causing all the development that went on around the subways. You try and buy a condo down by a subway station now, and you can't buy one. That's what subways did for Toronto, for example. Many of those main lines. LRTs are doing the same thing. The government knows there's big money in LRT. The developers all want LRTs as quickly as possible. And the way they're doing that is with the 3P system, which is fine for building. The reality is, to build them quickly, you are going to have to borrow that money. The government doesn't want to borrow it because they don't want it on the books. That's really what this is about. It's about hiding that debt. It doesn't mean we don't have the debt. The debt is still there. You have a consortium that borrows the money in the name of the consortium, and then they lend it to the government, and they pay for the building, and then they charge the government even more interest than they would if they'd have gone and borrowed it on their own. So the reality is, it costs taxpayers more money to do it this way. And then you look at the 30-year operating and maintaining agreements that they're signing. Someone said earlier, I think it was Brian, that shed the light, $500 million a year for one line they're getting. It's ridiculous, the amount of money that's going into coming out of the public purse and going into these private consortiums' hands. The reality is, every time they announce an RFP going out for an LRT, suddenly a bunch of companies come together and form these consortiums. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. The reality is, they're in it to make money. That's what it's all about. They want to make money, and there's nothing wrong with making money. We've said that time and time again. But the reality is, we know who does the best job, delivers on time, comes in on budget, and actually does what they say they're going to do, and that is public transit. It's done it for 125 years. We've connected people across this country And we've done it the most efficient and effective way. Now we're going through these P3s and we're seeing literally the wheels coming off the trains. That's what's going to happen because they're in it for profit. They're going to cut corners everywhere they can. Over a 30-year span, very few of them ever make it to the 30-year mark. They usually jump out around 10 years. You'll see it time and time again. If you do your research, it started over in England back in the Thatcher days. It came through to America and then it came over to Canada. And if you do your research, you will see in every one of these cases, they run the company into the ground. They pay minimum wages. They don't do quality work. They never deliver on time. They're never on budget. And at what point do we say enough is enough? If Ottawa wasn't enough to tell us this shouldn't be done anymore, I don't know. Here in Hamilton, we're building an LRT. And I've fought since 2014, we've been fighting to say, we don't want that P3 model. We absolutely refuse it. We had counsel, thanks to the work of Matthew Green, who was our counselor at the time here in Hamilton. We worked very closely with him, an excellent counselor. And we actually got city council at that time to vote that if we go ahead with an LRT here in Hamilton, that it will be operated and maintained by the Hamilton Street Railway. There are people saying, well, what do you know about LRT? Hamilton Street Railway. We started out with railways going down our street. They called streetcars. Yes, LRTs are a much more modern version of that. But the reality is we've been moving people en masse for many, many years. We've been doing it safely, effectively, and efficiently. That's what you want in public transit. Public transit was never designed to make profit. It was designed to move people en masse to where they need to be safely, effectively, and efficiently. And that's what we do in public transit.
Eric, thank you. Thank you. We're going to take a bit of a turn now, and I'm going to pass it off to Jill. Jill, so you can talk to some of our friends who are here tonight with us from your community, from Toronto, St. Paul's, to talk about the Eglinton Crosstown. So I know we've got Dante, we've got Dane, and we've got August. I'm going to pass it over to you.
And we've also got Liz.
Pardon me,
well
and Liz
too.
Sorry, Liz. Pardon
no
me,
problem. First things first, I wanted to say, Eric, thank you very much for your words. In my research, I was reading an article from the School of Public Policy, University of Calgary, the theory and evidence concerning public-private partnerships in Canada and elsewhere. And I just want to take a moment to read a couple of sentences. Here's what they said: rent to own, provide now, pay later, just as you were saying. In a typical PPP, P3s, governments pay little or nothing upfront and relatively large amounts over time. Thus, incumbent governments can provide current users and voters with current benefits, quote unquote, thereby garnering political credit while deferring costs to future politicians, future voters, or users. I think that's an important quote because it does highlight that the issues with the Eglinton Crosstown LRT did not start in 2018. They certainly got worse in 2018. But the Auditor General, for instance, right here in Ontario, has flagged the concerns of P3s. And those were flagged going all the way back to 2014, if not further back. And this government, nor the previous government, decided to take heed. So it was interesting for me as I was learning lots about P3s over the last while, this week concentrated, but certainly the last few years, that there really is a political gain here. And it really is to the benefit of the governing government to use P3s. So this is politics and this is profit. This is best friends, certainly over people. So I want to thank our folks from St. Paul's for joining this evening. I'm going to turn first and foremost to Black Urbanism TO Partnerships Director, Dane Williams. Butu is certainly one of the stalwarts in our community, one of the loudest voices with regards to the impacts that the Eglinton Crosstown LRT construction has had. And I want to make it clear here in St. Paul's, we are for development. We are not against development, but we need development that is socially responsible, that has environmental assessments, checks and balances, and also that put people first, communities first, that recognize that people live, work, and play in St. Paul's. We have historical communities in St. Paul's, and we need to ensure that any development that's coming, any infrastructure that's coming to our neighborhood is going to benefit us first and keep us here and not push us out of our community. Some whom have lived here for decades and decades and decades and now have had to leave, quite frankly, whether it's because of the alarming costs in housing, or whether it's because, frankly, they couldn't get from point A to B anymore in Eglinton and had to move elsewhere. So Dane, if you can share a little bit about BUTU, Black Urbanism TO, about the wonderful document, literally a letter of many, many dozens of pages that gave the Ministry of Transportation, the Minister of Transportation herself, a blueprint of how to help our community, how to build responsibly. Dane, if you can share with us what BUTU is up to and why you all are at the forefront of this conversation here in St. Paul's on the Eglinton Crosstown LRT and its impact directly on small businesses and in particular in Little Jamaica. Thank you, Dane.
Thank you so much, Jill, and good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. Before I jump into it, I did provide a presentation. I'm not sure if we're able to load it up as I go through. If not, that's totally fine. But just to
Ethan,
kind of see,
do you have that? Do you have that, Ethan? There we go. You're good.
Oh,
perfect.
wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ethan. So Black Urbanism Toronto is a non-for-profit organization that aims to increase the participation of Black people in community development to advance the collective cultural, economic, and social interests in the neighborhoods we call home. The organization collaborated to create a report titled A Black Business Conversation on Planning for the Future of Black-Owned Businesses and Residents on Eglinton Avenue West, which identified the diverse set of challenges faced by Black business owners in Little Jamaica with recommendations and strategies co-created with participating business owners. Ethan, can you please move to the next slide? Thank you so much. The report highlighted the Eglinton Crosstown LRT project, which has continued to face significant delays, cost overruns, and has physically disrupted the ability for customers to visit Little Jamaica business owners, which has led to a closure of 140 businesses along Eglinton Avenue West since our last report in 2020. In our report, it also identifies that there was a neglect by Metrolinx to involve Little Jamaica's cultural significance in the neighborhood when drafting an early environmental impact report, which is a failure to address the specific systematic barriers faced by Black-owned businesses. As we all know, the Eglinton Crosstown LRT project has been underway since 2011, and while we are all hopeful for the eventual benefits of improved transit in the area, it is important that we take a moment to recognize the significant impact that this project has had on small business owners who have been operating in the area for the past 12 to 13 years. From the arrival of Metrolinx, small business owners have been facing a multitude of obstacles that have hindered their ability to operate successful businesses. It has been at the hindrance of Metrolinx, an agency of the Ontario government under the Metrolinx Act 2006, that should have the responsibility to operate in a fiscally responsible and ethical way that benefits the business owners who operate within the boundaries of this LRT project. Next slide, please. So just want to identify quickly Little Jamaica and where we operate. So it's on Eglinton West, the main street, from Marley Avenue to Keele. Can you please move to the next slide? Thank you so much. So barricades on the roads, debris blocking business establishments, lack of parking for patrons, while in the same breath, Metrolinx employees throughout the project have been occupying the already limited street parking in front of business storefronts. Metrolinx, as an agency of Ontario government, should be demonstrating a higher duty of care, but instead has shown gross negligence in the way they operate on the ground, which in turn has impacted small business owners' ability to thrive and grow during the 12 to 13-year time span. Can we take into consideration the impact that construction has had on business owners' bottom line, and how are business owners supposed to survive with these barriers? Next slide, please. We have heard the repeated messaging that business owners will benefit at the completion of the project due to more accessible transportation. With a midtown connection between East and West Toronto, and getting across the town will be up to 60% faster than before. But at what expense? Many of the business owners who were in operation in 2011 are no longer operating. This LRT project has been at the expense of business owners who have been in operation for 20 to 30 years until the LRT Crosstown project. As an agency of the Ontario government, does Metrolinx not have an obligation to be responsible in their project development planning? Or are we going to continue seeing projects like these be at the expense of small business owners who are deemed as collateral damage? As you can see, based on the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, the Black businesses along Little Jamaica have been thought of as such. Next slide, please. So what we've proposed is there must be a policy change that in practice creates a more fair economy. In the case of infrastructure projects like the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, this means ensuring that local businesses are not left to suffer as a result of delays and cost overruns. One way to achieve this is by implementing a system of compensation directly to the small business owners affected by any LRT construction project. In every project, there should be a line item allocating a percentage of the project budget specifically for compensation to business owners who are impacted. If the project needs to be extended beyond the time allotted for the project, there should be additional compensation to bridge business owners until project completion. This would not only be a huge support for the small business owners who have been impacted by the LRT construction, and mind you, the backbone of the Canadian economy, but it would also build more accountability into LRT construction projects, in turn helping to create a fair economy and considerate economy where small business owners are not left to collateral damage. And finally, this is just similar to our recommendation, the Black Business Report, where we advocated for financial compensation to be paid directly to business owners due to LRT construction impacts. The level of compensation should be equity-based and take into account any effects of systematic anti-Black racism faced by the Black-owned businesses. Please, next slide. So thank you, everyone. That concludes kind of what Black Urbanism Toronto has been doing for the past 5 years, and just some of our insights in what we've seen, the barriers to the LRT project and, the kind of implications it's had on the Black businesses and the businesses in general all along Eglinton West. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
No, thank you, Dane. Black Urbanism TO is well respected, frankly, by every single elected official in St. Paul's. We know the invaluable resource that you all are, and frankly, your report, as you know, was the backbone for a motion that I had put forth as well to the legislature, calling for financial support for our small businesses, primarily in Little Jamaica and along Midtown, along Eglinton, that have been impacted by this Eglinton Crosstown LRT. And you make the point very clear that this needs to be responded to now. We just simply don't have any more time. As we continue to advocate for heritage status, for heritage designations in Little Jamaica, as we continue to speak about bringing people to our community to shop, to have a place to park. Parking, that's a whole other issue. This simply can't all be addressed if we have this construction going on for unknown timelines. I simply don't know if Little Jamaica will exist to be as we know it can be if we're waiting for another year or two for this to be complete. So thank you, Dane, for your insight. And as always, you can reach out to any of us on the call to support the proposals that you're putting forth.
Thank you so much.
And next, we have Liz Glore Bell, who is also a resident here in St. Paul's and who is also an environmental advocate, who's going to speak to the inextricable link between this Eglinton Crosstown LRT construction, the government's abdication of responsibility, and how that dovetails, quite frankly, into the way that they've ignored, that they try to erase and frankly discredit calls from advocates to see the climate crisis for exactly what it is. The construction does impact our climate. It has health impacts for our residents here in St. Paul's, and Liz is going to share a bit of some of that. Thank you, Liz, for being here.
Yes, thank you, Jill, so much for having me. And thank you, Joel, also. I live in Toronto, St. Paul's, which is impacted by the Eglinton LRT, but my sister actually also lives in Joel's riding in Ottawa. So this is an issue very close to my heart, very literally. And, I live in the neighborhood. I have driven, I've cycled and walked and shopped along the future crosstown line. Dane, I actually really was thinking during your presentation, which was so great, by the way, thank you, that it really is a great example of failed sustainable development, because sustainable development, if that had been the goal, should be taking into consideration environmental, social, and fiscal considerations. And so we can see that through not taking even social considerations into consideration from the start of it, it sort of dovetailed into this overall failure on all three. And so, I really recognize some of those photos of like the closed sidewalks and the disrupted streets. So I really felt that. And I just want to say, like, it's so obvious to those of us who live in the neighborhood how necessary this line is to be built. That's why they've tried to build it twice, the first time in the 1990s, which did not work out so well with our then premier, Mike Harris. But it is very important. And I'm going to talk about three main areas that impacts the environment with it, which are air quality, the dangers to pedestrians and cyclists, and then, of course, climate change. So with this construction, we've had sort of perpetual construction and unending, unceasing. We are having increasing and ongoing impacts to air quality. And air quality is something that really can impact people's health. There are estimates of about 13,000 people dying every year prematurely due to air quality issues in Toronto alone. They can be caused by things like stroke and heart disease. And even today, there's been stuff in the news about breathing in fumes causing brain damage. So, air quality is a serious issue. It's caused by idling cars as well as from the actual construction itself. And then the delays that are caused by the construction creates dangers for pedestrians and cyclists. That has to do with the physical construction spaces. There's been accidents along the construction line. There have been holes in the ground. There's been frustrated, angry drivers who are making mistakes and acting, not in the ways that they might do on their best day. We've had more accidents in the area and along parallel streets, including a woman who died this month from an accident on a parallel street. And then in terms of climate change, driving and cars are the second largest source of carbon emissions in Toronto. In this particular stretch of the city, we would have a lot more idling cars, but we also have impacts to that last mile for people who are wanting to take transit. So the last mile concept is the idea that people who want to take public transit have to account for the last mile, or 2.2 kilometers of their journey. And so often that would be taken by a bus or walking or cycling. And it's a very disrupted situation. I know people who can't park their bike where they would like to because of the construction. They can't walk. It's very frustrating, which drives people then into cars and makes the construction worse. And then, of course, just the fact that more people are driving because there is no transit along that space. Like there's buses, but it's not the way it should be. And then all of that, of course, just dovetails into a loss of confidence in our public transit systems and to our public officials who have promised us this system. And I just really don't want to have in Toronto what I've heard from my friends happen in Ottawa, which is that the LRT has ruined transit. So I don't want that to happen here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Liz, for your words. None of us want it to happen, and we are hoping that the powers that be will listen to our calls for a public inquiry. We already know that Mayor Tory is not in support of a public inquiry, and that speaks volumes. When really a public inquiry is simply an attempt, it's a report to give the taxpayers the rationale around the time spent on this project, the cost of this project, an environmental assessment, the impact, the health impacts of this project, and what we can learn from that so it doesn't happen again. And we do want to just take a moment to remember that woman who lost her life on Hillsdale. Thank you, Liz, for mentioning it. I do appreciate it. Next up, We want to hear from August from TTC Riders. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your advocacy around equitable and accessible standards for riders to be able to get from point A to B. If anyone isn't aware, I just want to share some recommendations that TTC Riders has had, such as no cuts to public transit, certainly wanting them to expand free TTC to people receiving social assistance, to high school students, to increase COVID-19 mass distributions in education, and release real-time crowd data publicly. I'm wondering, August, if you can speak to what you're hearing from riders with regards to their concerns with this construction and how they feel this is going to impact their traveling.
Yes, thank you, Jill. Well, we have our share of P3 projects here in the city, and Crosstown is one of them. It's been under construction since 2011. It was supposed to open in 2020. I was a little kid when they started construction. I barely remember what the Crosstown even was. And I'm now an adult, mostly. And it's still not done. It was supposed to be done in 2021, 2022. And now we don't have a confirmed date. So once again, it goes back to this issue with P3s. Where's the accountability? Where's the transparency? If we can't hold them accountable, how do we, the public, know what we're getting, what this transit's going to deliver us? So that's, a major issue. I think Liz and Dane did like a really good job of explaining some of the community impacts, specifically with climate and equity. One of the impacts that I would like to add specifically is to service. People in Ottawa might be familiar with this as much as in Toronto. We have a city budget crunch, and that includes the TTC service that's getting crunched, right? So with the operating budget release, we're seeing resources stretched thin to operate the new Crosstown line and the Finch line. Despite the capital cost of the project being observed in the province and its beloved P3s, the city is left to come up with the resources to operate the line. And it's important to note that here in the city of Toronto, most of the costs to operate the lines, they're paid by us, they're paid by the riders. We pay, before the pandemic, we're paying almost 70% of the cost to ride the lines. So we are paying for these overruns ourselves out of pocket. And that is simply unacceptable. So, with the budget crunch, that just means we're going to have service cuts to the existing system. We know that trains and buses and streetcars are going to run less often because of these service cuts. There's going to be a 25% reduction in subway service compared to pre-pandemic levels this year. It's a major cut. And we looked at the report and we see that it's because they're shifting operators from the subway to operate the Crosstown LRT and operate the Finch line. And there's not enough resources to, fill that gap. And what that means for riders, that means longer wait times. And I think it's been touched already. Longer wait times is a safety issue. You don't want to be waiting long at night. That's uncomfortable. It's absolutely uncomfortable for many people. And even before the Crosstown, we had issues with P3 projects. You might be familiar with Presto. I'm sure people in Ottawa are very familiar with Presto and its various issues. It was procured in a P3 between Metrolinx and Accenture. There are faulty issues, machines. There's inequitable access in the suburbs. There's an exclusive agreement with Shoppers Drug Mart to sell them there. It's not very accessible. And you used to be able to buy tokens at over 1,200 locations across the city. Now it's down to 300. It's not accessible. And these private consortiums, you can't hold them accountable to serving the people of the city. They just don't. So those trying to access even the Fair Pass discount, our low income discount in the city, they're forced to get Presto cards. They're faced with the same upfront costs and the same barriers because they're only sold in a few different places. Yeah, and I guess the lack of accountability to transit users and the lack of local control. When there was a problem with discriminatory light and sound made by Presto cards for people using that same Fair Pass, it took years for the TTC to fix that because they don't have control over it. Presto basically does. And here's a little fact that some people might not know. Every time we pay our fare on the TTC, 5.25% of it goes to Presto. That is our fare going to a private company. It's simply ridiculous, isn't it?
Not to mention the Presto card isn't free.
You have to pay $6 up front. Yeah, and that time when we TTC riders, we were fighting for that 2 hour fare window, which yay, we won that. But Presto charged TTC $5 million to implement that.
Good God.
So, you know, it's
My
it's
goodness.
not great. Yeah. So, you know, P3s mean a lot of things for transit riders in Toronto. It's a lack of transparency on the details of transit projects, lack of accountability. It's stretching the TTC's resources thin, and it's stretching provincial money for transit expansion. TTC used to be in charge of the subways, and then when Infrastructure Ontario took over, the promise for P3s was that it was gonna, you know, transfer risk and lower the cost of the
Right.
subways. But you know, guess what? These new subway projects, like the Ontario line, like the Scarborough subway, they're costing over double of the Vaughan extension, which was run by the city. So it's doing the complete opposite. It's completely failed. It's fallen on its face. So what is the point of all of this, right? Um, so I just end that what we really want to see is we want to see the province return to subsidize transit operations. If they're going to be putting these expensive transit projects in our city, which we, you know, we need them, they should be helping pitch in to help operate them because we're so short funded. And in the past, the province used to provide a 50% operating subsidy. We need to return to that. It was cut in the 90s, around the same time when that Eglinton West subway was cut.
And
We
filled
need
back.
transparency. And we need transparency and accountability with our rapid transit projects through Metrolinx. The Metrolinx board is not accountable to us because there's no elected officials on the Metrolinx board. So if there's no elected officials, how do we hold them accountable to the people living here in this city, right? And last but not least, we should have a public inquiry into the Eglinton Crosstown's overruns and delays, as everyone has called for. Yeah.
Thank you so much, August. And tell me if anyone wants to get involved with TTC Riders or, you know, Toronto Environmental Alliance or any other organization. Yes, Liz, I had to give you all a shout out. Any other organization that's got the public's interest at heart and wants to see our transit remain public, wants to see all infrastructure have environmental assessments. How do we do that? How do we get involved, August and Liz?
Well, I guess for TTC Riders specifically, you can go to our website, ttcriders.ca, and we're demanding that Mayor Tory and the councillors reverse those service cuts and they advocate for more resources into the TTC so we don't have to be waiting longer for buses or trains. And then we hold, you know, people accountable for these projects.
Thank you, August. And Liz?
If you would like to support the Toronto Environmental Alliance, you can go to torontoenvironment.org, though I do not work there anymore.
No, I know.
They're still great though, and they're doing the joint work with TTC Riders.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you, August. And thank you, Dane. And last but certainly not least, Dante, I'd like to ask you to share your perspective as a transit user. Dante is the lead building operator at Holy Blossom Temple here in St. Paul's, the major intersection being Bathurst and Eglinton. They've certainly seen the consequences of the construction years back. Things are looking a lot better at Bathurst and Eglinton. But Dante, can you share your insight? Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, all. I've worked on Eglinton for about 6 years now. I first came here to this part of the city in 2017, and I was working on a construction site. So I remember when I first moved here, knowing that the project is already years in, thinking we're well underway, maybe a few more years of this, and then things will be a bit more normal. You know, those were simpler at times. I was a lot less bitter, but yeah, I remember seeing that at Yonge and Eglinton, there was a situation where because of the construction and the workers, the way that the space had been treated, we had really big rats running around like a major intersection in the city. Like I saw them with my own eyes, and that was like the first time I realized that this project wasn't necessarily being treated with the respect you'd think it would be. Like especially like at that intersection, you think they'd be a bit more careful in how they treated the space around their work, but it wasn't the case, and it kind of just continued in that way. There's a stretch on Eglinton between Eastbourne Avenue and Avenue Road where the concrete barriers come out so far into the street that it doesn't really leave enough space for two TTC buses to safely pass each other. So that whole stretch of road, both when buses get there at the same time, they basically have to like stop to it, like come to a crawl and go very slowly past each other because it's like hit or miss whether or not they're going to trade paint. And like that's another example of the right hand not knowing what the left is doing on this project. And it's the kind of thing that once you notice it, you become a lot less confident in any announcements for when they're going to be finishing, or any good news that comes from them. You see these things and you realize it's probably hot air. It's been interesting to watch. One of the things that I was talking about with a friend was that, like, just from the outside looking in, we're not super well versed on it, but it seems like you see condos go up, and as annoying as their construction is, like they work to kind of finish as quickly as possible because every day that they are building is cutting into their profit, right? With this project, their coffers are taxpayer dollars. It's a bottomless pit. They have no timer. They're not even incentivized to finish on schedule, really, especially when there's no punishment or consequence for delays. The longer you take, the more paychecks are coming in. Like it's in their best interest almost to continue with the delays and dragging their feet. And I think people around my age and younger get a bad rap for being kind of politically disengaged or apathetic. And I think this project and all the public delays and whatnot have like they're a clear example of why people feel so disconnected from the political process, because we all kind of know that the people that are responsible for this, they're not going to really face any sort of consequence. We hope they do, and it is possible that maybe we'll be surprised, but most likely whoever is making the most money from this is just going to move on from this to the next project, And I think it's.
Well, sorry, finish your thought, Jonte. Finish your thought, Jonte. I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, it was just I think not knowing that there's not going to be any consequences for these delays for the people who really are kind of leading the charge with this program is it's really kind of what is making people feel like there's nothing we can do about it. So it makes you more apathetic. It's like a feedback loop that
Jeez.
Yeah.
Perfect analogy.
Jill,
Thank
if you
you.
don't mind, if you don't mind this being a segue here.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I just think Dante just hit on a theme that is seems to me so very Ottawa. This is how a lot of people feel. We're about to lose one of our guests who's with us tonight, Sean Menard, councillor here, member of our Transit Commission. And just so people watching, and thank you for staying with us, we're now going to transition a little bit into the Ottawa story and a little bit of research on the procurement, so people have an idea of why we keep running into some of these troubles with these secretive arrangements. So I also have our very good friend, MPP Kristen Wong-Tam, served the great city of Toronto for 12 years and saw Metro Links draw up Eglinton Crosstown, and we'll be going to you soon, Kristen. So Sean, we're going to lose you momentarily, so I want to go right to you. And if you wouldn't mind picking up on Dante's theme that I felt right in my heart about people feeling disengaged and that people will not pay any price. Given what you've seen, Sean, with respect to the LRT inquiry in Toronto, given what you're hearing around the city council table in Ottawa, how angry are residents in the city, and how much do they want companies like Boxfish, operatives who have made millions of dollars off of this project, which repeatedly has failures? Do you think I guess the question I would have to you, borrowing from your words, Dante, inspiring me, how much do you think people want justice?
Thanks so much, Joel. Thanks for having me here, and Jill for hosting as well. And just incredibly inspiring speakers here. Just hearing, from people like Dante and Liz and Marvin. I loved Marvin's presentation as well. Clint obviously knows the Ottawa situation extremely well. I can tell you, people are absolutely at their wits' end with it. We had a 6-day shutdown recently after all the troubles we've been having, and after the public inquiry came out, and after a new city council was elected, and then it followed with another shutdown later on, a few days later. We are, people are livid, and there's no accountability because of the way that the deal has been structured. And I can tell you that it's extremely difficult to get out of the deal. And so even just the reference to getting a public inquiry, hearing, the words of August, getting a public inquiry was no easy task, Joel, as you know, right? We were trying every avenue. We were going to the Ombudsman in Ontario, the AG in Ontario, getting staff reports about what accountability would be, look like as an option, and being pushed away from that by pursuing that by our own city staff. It was twice brought to city council, and one was replaced by status quo councillors with an internal auditor's report instead of a publicly available judicial review. And then when Councillor McKenney, who recently ran for mayor, brought it a second time, it was voted down 13-10 by a mayor who obviously had a lot to lose. And we saw that because he left in disgrace from the city, as did the city manager, after that report was released. And obviously, Joel, luckily, residents didn't stop. They kept emailing. And Joel, you didn't stop in calling for this in the legislature repeatedly, and eventually convinced the provincial government to call the inquiry. But all of those instances where we had the chance as a city council to call an inquiry very, very much reminds me of Josh Matlow's motion and what has happened in Toronto City Council and that mayor, what they have to lose, that they've pushed back and said, no, we're going to have some other third-party review instead of, and it's exactly what happened in Ottawa, instead of this judicial inquiry, which, has revealed startling things in our city, not just about P3s, but about the negligence of the public, about the public trust, about staff, councillors' trust with staff and that relationship. And so, it found, to your point about Boxfish, Deloitte, one of the 4 kind of large global consulting and accounting companies, we had hired them in the city of Ottawa to advise on, procurement and financing. And their job, not surprisingly, they recommend P3s all the time. That's what they're brought in for, right? So, and these companies are tied, they're brought in as independent experts, and the public inquiry found that they didn't fully consider the disadvantages associated with the P3 model for the delivery of LRT1, or the downsides of proceeding with them. And I can tell you, we asked those questions on stage 2 when it was found that the company we selected didn't meet the technical score, should have never gone through the process, right? And we were lied to about it. They didn't tell us that they didn't meet the technical score, and we asked repeatedly, and our staff would not tell us, and the lawyers that they had hired, who were also working for SNC-Lavalin at the time. The company we hired as our independent lawyers were also working for SNC-Lavalin at the time, would not divulge that information. And so it just, I'm very frustrated as a councillor, right? And so I can only imagine residents that are having to use this every single day and experiencing it and feeling like they're powerless when you bring these things to council, and it's not, your council's not reacting to you the way you want it to happen. It's just overwhelming. And so, the public inquiry found that we led to a situation where the parties' attentions were diverted away from protecting their legal rights instead of actually opening a reliable LRT because of the P3. They found that City of Ottawa deliberately was misleading and inaccurate information being provided to City Council, and that the failure of senior city officials, including the mayor, the chair of Transit Commission, failed to tell council the light rail system hadn't met the original testing requirements we had put out for it. The report found that the P3 meant that city staff believed that the provincial contribution was at risk if the city did not adopt the P3. This is problems obviously in Ontario and federal government as well, where there's pressure to go down these routes, and found that one of the biggest problems with the LRT has been the use of an untested light rail vehicle, and which was resulted from the P3 privatization scheme, because the other people that bid on the project, we couldn't go with those consortia for other potential vehicles. So we went with a brand new vehicle. It left Alstom as one of the only suppliers of the vehicle. And if the P3 scheme hadn't been put in place, would have been possible to pick the best available vehicle, right? So just there's so much culminating in this report, and the frustration is palpable by our residents. And now I can tell you, just this a recent settlement, it's like pulling teeth to get out of this thing, right? We had an opportunity to find them in default, and the way that they set it up, it's a 27-year deal, 30-year deal, and they make it almost impossible to exit from it, even after all of this has gone on, whether it's a new supplier or subcontractor or in-house model. They make it nearly impossible. So anyway, I'll leave it there, Joel, but just want to thank you so much for tonight. And the speakers have inspired me here, and what great panelists.
Well, Laura, now over to you. So Sean's given us, it's a pleasure to have you here, Sean. It's a pleasure to have you here. Sean's given us an insight of what it looked like from inside City Council. You're the person who's doing so much of the spokesperson work around the 6-day delay that we've had, talking to riders, talking to people who are organizers for public transit in our city, paratransit in our city. What are you hearing from people? How motivated are they? Where do you think people are at?
It's hard talking about this, because really what we're looking at is year after year of failed opportunity to get people to make greener choices, to get people to make transit their number one choice. Instead, for a lot of people, it's their last choice now. We've seen years of unreliability dating back to even just the fact that it took years longer than expected to get the LRT up off the ground. Clinton told us about the fact that their members were hearing there were going to be layoffs, so people rightly went out and looked for new jobs. So we had a shortage of bus operators. Now we've got phase 2 LRT delayed. And again, we've had a shortage of bus operators because their planning indicated that we weren't going to need these people. So why hire them? So really, the riders are experiencing all of these challenges at every turn. And there's been a huge problem with communication. We've had from day one, there's an old joke that it's really common in the blue collar trades that you're part of the mushroom division, that you're kept in the dark and fed crap. And that's kind of how riders feel too, because for a lot of the time, when there's been a problem with the train, we hear it from fellow riders who are getting on social media, tweeting it out, putting on Facebook, letting us know that there's problems because OC Transpo doesn't know or won't tell us. And it ends up really frustrating people and making them not feel like transit's a great choice. Even before the pandemic, we were seeing year over year declines in transit ridership share across the city. So even if transit ridership was going up a little bit, it wasn't going up as fast as population growth. We were losing that share. And transit, this whole LRT project was supposed to bring those riders back, was supposed to invite them back to transit. And now I'm hearing from people that are organizing carpools to get downtown for their, back to office work, because we know, these public servants have been working all along, but now having to be back in a physical building, they're looking for other options. They're looking for ways around. We've got people who've started walking and biking and, like I said, carpooling or just plain driving their own car because they don't feel transit is a reliable way to get around. And that loss of public confidence is more than just the dilapidated stations that are already showing, cracks in the concrete, water leaking, vegetation that dies and isn't replaced, all these little things that show that the people who run it don't care. Beyond that, we've lost that public confidence. And you think about how it is we get that back. It's not just a promotional campaign. That's not enough here. It's not just saying, maybe we'll think about freezing fares for 1 year and then we'll jack them up twice the next year, because that's what always happens in Ottawa. We know the long-term plan is 2.5% fare increases in perpetuity, even though we already have some of the highest transit fares in North America. We know that's not a way to invite people to make transit their first choice, yet that's what we decide to do. The idea that transit is run as a business, we keep hearing our OC Transpo officials talk about customers of transit. No, I'm sorry, these are riders, these are citizens. Transit is a public service first and always was a public service. And until we understand that and treat it that way and give people that confidence that this is a public service in the public interest, we are not going to rebuild that trust. And that's where we need to start. I know we're running a little over, so I will leave it at that, but riders are ticked.
Testify. That was beautiful, Laura. I think I saw a lot of waving hands across the Zoom boxes there. So Kristen Wong-Tam, my good friend from Toronto Centre, our good friend from Toronto Centre. Now, Kristen, you saw the evolution of the Eglinton Crosstown over a number of years. And soon after you offer your insights, we're going to delve into an infrastructure discussion with a friend, Toon Dreesen, who's going to actually talk about how we can figure out the logic of these projects when they're coming at us. But tell us, if you don't mind, for the benefit of your experience, what did the Eglinton Crosstown look like when it was sold to the City of Toronto? And did you start having any suspicions along the way, long before the more recent revelations?
Joel, thank you. And to Jill, to the both of you, thank you for bringing together this very important conversation. I do want to recognize how fortunate we are to have so many subject matter experts, especially from our friends of ATU. I've oftentimes said, we have, and we still do, have the best transit system in North America. And of course, we've won many awards, and it has been recognized for a number of years. But it takes time and investment to keep that sort of first class status. And I know as of late, it has been very, very difficult. It's really hard to talk about transit in Toronto without taking a look at how we've seen the privatization agenda sort of take over, portions of the TTC, as well as, of course, we're talking about Metrolinx. But, I know that, and this is what I wanted to say, especially as we have ATU here in the House, they have been on the front lines of trying to defend public transit for public use and riders for as long as I can remember. And my family and I came to Canada in 1970s, and nobody had a car. Mom didn't have a car, dad didn't have a car. If the TTC didn't take us there, we couldn't get there. So it was not an option. So, I think I went through what I believe was the first 20 years of sort of like my first time in decades in Canada, what I would call my golden years. The TTC was literally the lifeline that brought me and my family to where we needed to go. But we did see some changes in the 1990s, as you will all recall. I think, it was already spoken to about the lack of funding that was coming from the or I should say the defunding of transit that came from Mike Harris, and the downloading that came in afterwards. And what we started to see was a decline in the quality of public transit. Stations started to crumble. There was a lack of capital repair dollars, and all of a sudden the system was being starved. The reason why I want to start there, Joel, is I want to talk about how we got to a place of privatization in P3. And I want to be very clear, is that P3 and privatization are exactly the same thing. I know that the viewers on this screen will certainly know that, but if we just go, if we heard from the proponents of P3, who are the same proponents and worshipers of the the privatization shrine, is just become a new branding moniker to make it perhaps a little bit more palatable by sticking in the word public when it almost has nothing left that is serving the public interest. So the TTC, in my opinion, especially after sitting through 12 years of city council, I've worked on 12 separate city budgets, and I have seen that every single year it is becoming harder and harder for the TTC to operate that first of class system, despite the fact that we have the best bones, right? So the transit system had to always expand, whether it's through Transit City or perhaps, the expansion into Scarborough, into areas that are not as well served. And then Eglinton Crosstown and the LRT system, including Finch, East and West, was going to be the one that threaded all together. And that was the piece that I really think, we started to move even further into the privatization agenda. The proponents really started to bring that forward. You asked the question, was there concern at City Council? There were. I will tell you that I remember very clearly we were asking critical questions as Metrolinx came to us and said, that they were going to, they were going to sort of help us build this transit, but it had to be on their terms. We had to use their P3 procurement, which is exactly the same argument that McGuinty and Wynn used to sell the Eglinton Crosstown to us. And it sort of forced the city into a backward position where we're on our heels. I don't think necessarily, I know ATU certainly didn't want to do it. City Council was kind of strapped going, how do we accept transit, but we had to work with the provincial terms that were set before us. And the same trap is now being set with the Ontario line. Exactly the same trap. If you want provincial dollars, you're going to have to work through our P3 model, which is exactly the same thing, all privatization, 30-year contracts, not even just, of course, the construction, but the ongoing maintenance that literally goes in perpetuity. So were there concerns? 100%. Did the city manager and the mayors the mayors at that time, try to convince us that, you know, this was a good deal? Yes, they did. Did they, I'm going to choose my words carefully. Did they lie to city council? They gave us the answers that I think got them over the finish line, which means council would have gone ahead and approved it. But were there significant doubts? It was a lot of trust us. We're at the table negotiating with the province, and conversations and negotiations are underway and going well. I think ATU, who watches city council like a hawk, you will remember those debates. You'll remember the questions that were raised as we were trying to extrapolate answers, and we were given not clear answers except for wait and see, and city council had to delegate the authority to the city managers in order for them to go off and negotiate the deals. They were willing to cut out the political oversight. I remember this very clearly. They were willing to cut out the political oversight for expediency. So literally we're stuck in a place that, do we say no to transit and then look like we were going to say, you know, we don't care about transit expansion when we desperately need it, when the city was growing? Or do we accept a deal that we knew was going to be pretty bad or wasn't great with a big, I trust, you know, trust me, we'll take care of the details later on. And of course, the details as they're revealed, the Eglinton Crosstown, 2 years over budget, 2 years delay, no end in sight, no accountability, no public accountability anyways, and $1 billion over budget and growing and sinking. That is what happened when we were told to trust the bureaucrats, because they were going to be in conversation with Metrolinx and we needed to leave it to them to iron out the details. That's what delegated authority did to us, in my opinion. And that would probably be, you know, if there's any regrets, I mean, obviously if we only had hindsight, but I really wish that the mayor of the day, you know, was able to stand up and say, no, we can't accept it unless we get it on our terms, and you have to be much more open. But those dollars they came with a lot of strings, and they came with very little details.
My goodness. Tone Dreesen. Tone Dreesen is in the house, past president of the Ontario Association of Architects, someone who's written about P3s. And Tone, you saw King Asurma, the Minister of Infrastructure. You saw Michael Lindsay, CEO of Infrastructure Ontario, say, everybody wants to be like Ontario. But I got to tell you, more and more, as I'm hearing our friends talk tonight, I'm thinking like we got to figure out a way to get to the heart of, help us understand from your perspective, Tone, why are P3s attractive to government? Are all P3s the same? How do we take this on, you know, with the research that you've written about? Like, it seems as if the province has decided this is the future, as Christian just said. They're talking about $158 billion of P3 projects, not only transit, in the next 10 years. So what do you think, what are the arguments as you understand them that we need to be thinking about in order to start picking this apart beyond the obvious stuff that everybody has spoken to tonight so eloquently? Delays, disappointments, broken promises. What's on your mind?
Well, it goes to the bigger issues of how we go about getting the society we aspire to. You know, it's before I get too into this, I really am so excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I see Kristen and Jill, who I've followed on Twitter for years, and Laura, who's a good friend, and Dane Williams from Black Urbanism in Toronto, whose voice I've followed for years. So it's so wonderful to see everybody here. You know, these are issues that really go to a heart of what I believe in is the serving of the public. You know, the work that I do as an architect, the work that the government should be paying for should serve the public interest. And if the government hires me to do something, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to make a buck, I'm going to make a profit on it, but it shouldn't be at the expense of the public interest. And that's the real failure that we're seeing here. You know, we used to have a thriving, for example, you know, industry of hospital design. We had local architectural practices in communities across the province who designed and had deep knowledge of how to design healthcare facilities. That's all P3. Every hospital we've built in the last 20, 25 years has 75% of them have been built by 2 firms. 25 firms share the remaining 25%. of those hospitals. So we've effectively sole sourced hospital construction to 2 firms in the province. And those 2 firms use 2 or 3 different architectural engineering firms, and no one else can get into that market. So everyone who used to know how to design hospitals hasn't had a chance to be able to do that in 20 years. So that knowledge base is gone. That technology is gone. At the point where we stop building hospitals and another generation passes and we need that knowledge again, it's gone. It's completely gone. Those people are retired. They're dead. There's nobody left for that. We've hollowed out that experience. And when we see the way P3s get delivered, what we end up with is typically, especially in buildings, the mantra is that you get a building, but it's not the building you wanted. It's designed to meet the minimum requirements of the contract. It's then maintained within the minimum requirement of the contract. And so, yeah, okay, great. In 30 years, the city of Ottawa will own that, LRT system outright and will have paid that maintenance contract. But we'll have a 30-year-old LRT system that'll need massive capital investment in it because it's been maintained to within an inch of its life.
Right.
There's no value in trying to do anything better because there's no profit in doing so, and there's no public interest. And for me, the issues associated with things like transit is, this should serve the public interest. If we had a really incredibly efficient transit system that made a profit, that somehow made a profit, that profit should go back into better service, lower rates, lower fees, or it should subsidize the costs of some other public service that loses money. If we make profit in our transit made a profit, and we use that to subsidize our overall city budget in libraries or something else, then we're seeing a net benefit to society. But what we're getting with an LRT is with a P3 is a higher cost of borrowing. We have to design it twice because you have to design it as an exemplar, and then that goes over the fence and somebody else has to design it again. So you have to design it twice. It takes twice as long, and you get lower value. And because of the opacity of the contracts and the ability of a city to say, oh, well, that's commercially confidential information. You can't see that. You can't know that. You can't read that contract. You can't take pictures of that contract. You can't make notes. Nobody really knows what's in these contracts. And it's only when it falls apart. And so who's making money? Well, I apologize to all the lawyers on the call, but the lawyers are the ones who are making the money, right? The lawyers are the ones who are profiting off of the benefit of this. And then you get the real fallout, like, the wooden screen at the Lansdowne Stadium. The guy who built that, this was a once in a lifetime opportunity for him. It was the culmination of his career to build that wooden screen. Well, he went bankrupt. Electricians on Lansdowne, bankrupt. Contractors in the LRT, bankrupt. And they're going bankrupt because they're doing their work in good faith, but they're being hired by a consortium who's in it for profit. There's a weasel clause, there's a contract clause, and then they're out. And then there's no accountability. And so that becomes frustrating. And what I see that really affects the people in something like the LRT in Ottawa is you get the poor guys who are driving the R1 bus. Not only is it a miserable job to be a bus driver, like you're already dealing with traffic and cranky people and pandemic and everything else and construction and snowfall and everything else. And now you've got people who are late for work or late for school. They're crabby. They're on the bus. They're angry. They're pissed off. And and the drivers are the ones who are facing this on a day-to-day basis, and they're stuck with this. And that's really disheartening. And what I know about P3s, and it's different in the UK, they call it PFI, which is Private Finance Initiative, is that when bankruptcies have happened, Carillion went bankrupt. It was a huge construction company. They went bankrupt. They left the UK government 200 billion pounds on the hook. 200 billion pounds that they were left on the hook. And who steps in to pick that up? Suppose RTG, suppose TransLink, I forget who's building the one. Suppose that company just goes belly up and they just go, forget it, and they walk away from it. Who's left to pick up the pieces? Well, it's the public service. It's the public sector. They're stuck with it. So it's really not in the public interest. There are some benefits when you don't have an expertise, like Calgary explored different models for for a P3 to build the tracks and the maintenance yards. There's some mechanisms where there's a value in getting that expertise, but as a whole lump sum, throw everything into the basket, it's not a good idea. It just doesn't work.
Tone, thank you so much. Okay, Jill, let's think about tonight and where we're going from here. I'll throw to you in a second, but I want, if if it's all right, I look at a question that's come in through the Q&A. I think what's happened to us tonight, those of us who watch this, we're just drinking in the wisdom here. A metaphor that occurred to me as I've heard many of you talk, it's like we're picking up the rocks and we're seeing what's crawling underneath to some extent in this industry. My goodness. But Jill, as you think about the debate, right now in your city, somebody in the Q&A has pointed out, if, as Tone was just saying, these P3 systems, the Eglinton Crosstown, are stage 1, stage 2 of our LRT, are being run to the minimal amount possible because profit, as Clint said right up the top, is the most important thing, right? What is the link, the person who's posed the question in the Q&A, between that and the violence and the violence that we're seeing, sadly, that transit workers are facing? Are you hearing this in St. Paul's when people are having these discussions?
We're certainly hearing that the buildup, the frustration of this line being incomplete, the traffic jams, the congestion on our sidewalks, delay subways because more people are getting on, for instance, at Eglinton, whatever the case might be, people are frustrated. And when frustration is met with the desperation of getting to work on time, is met with folks who may be struggling and may have all sorts of issues, who are using, having to use our public transit for housing because we have a housing crisis. Things can happen, and we've seen what can happen. So really, all that to say, we got to get this done. We need it to be safe. We need those who are doing the work to be safe and respected. I mean, when you hear, storylines like Crosstown LRT builder showed implicit bias when it fired Black workers, says labor board. The company building the Eglinton Crosstown LRT discriminated against a Black construction worker when it fired him 3 years ago, the Ontario Labor Relations Board has found. You hear another headline like he worked as a VP for Metrolinx while the agency awarded his private consulting firm contracts worth millions. People are frustrated because, the taxpayers are going to work. They're going to the grocery. They're having a hard time affording food. And we're hearing of CEOs and their incomes that are ballooning. People at their firms who are consultants, whose private firms are ballooning. And people are frustrated. People are frustrated. And, you can't condone violence. We cannot condone violence. But we can certainly see how a recipe of lack of transparency, a recipe of loss of control, the feeling that the government is getting rich while everybody else is struggling. This can certainly lead to poor choices.
Marvin and Clint, Kristen, I'm going to go right to you in a moment, but Marvin and Clint, same question to you, the question posed to us in the CNA. Marvin, if you don't mind me going to you first. Do you think, as the person is asking us there's a link between constant underfunding of the transit systems and the safety of your members? Is that something that resonates with you from what you've seen and live every day?
Absolutely. With people being more and more frustrated with lack of reliable service, overcrowding, when profit is the narrative and that's the almighty thing that they're concerned about, safety and reliable service, the people will get squeezed. People will be frustrated. They'll take these frustrations out on each other and transit workers. That's what we're trying to prevent. That it's about the best interest of serving the public, not for profit. Once the profit is part of the equation, it's never in the public's interest. We're here to try to provide a reliable service, and with profit being there as the motivator, we are all going to be compromised. We're all going to suffer because of it, and people will not get what they've paid for because the money will be in somebody else's pocket as opposed to part of the deployment of service. And that's what we're trying to avoid. What we've had in the last couple of weeks here in Toronto with transit violence, people are frustrated with each other. People are frustrated from the system. People are taking out each other. We have an issue where there's not enough resources regarding, sorry to pivot a little bit, with the underhoused regarding mental illness. The governments are ignoring where resources are supposed to be, and people are suffering. We're not getting the resources to people with the dignity that they need to get out of the transit system. People are using the transit system as part of the social safety, the safety network, as 24-hour shelters and that kind of thing. We know that it's going to be causing an issue for transit workers and transit riders. So when the governments are ignoring what's obvious to them, it's going to create a frustration in society and it's going to explode. We've seen it in Toronto. It's not a matter of if, it's when, with what's going on. And that's what we're trying to avoid. It's all this is in the best interest of the public.
Clint, what's the story in Ottawa? Does this resonate with you too? Do you see this too?
No, absolutely. And I agree with everything that Marvin just said. I mean, when reliability suffers, the public suffers, then our members suffer because the public is frustrated, and I can't blame them. I mean, if you have no reliability in the transit system and they can't rely on it, you're going to be frustrated and you take it out on the frontline worker or the first person you see, and that happens to be the operators. And, you know, like Joel, you know, you live in Ottawa, you're from Ottawa, and we had barriers and shields installed on all our buses because there was a lot of assaults. Assaults were climbing tenfold in Ottawa, and we had to do something about it. I lobbied for shields and barriers on buses, and I got nothing but obstacles from the former GM about having barriers and shields on buses, and finally they did that, and we've seen the actual physical assaults decline. But now we're seeing more verbal and spitting happening. So they're spitting at shields and barriers because they're frustrated. And you know what? All they want is a reliable and affordable service, and that's not happening.
Fair enough. Kristen, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. I just wanted to add, because I think, you know, it's already been touched upon about the fact that the transit system has become part of the sort of de facto safety net. Residents don't have places to go. Sometimes they seek shelter. We've seen it for years, right? People go into the bus shelter to seek some warmth. Now they're going into the stations. Now they're going into the trains. They are riding the 24-hour system where they can. And literally, they're just trying to survive. So I think it's important for us to recognize that the TTC in Toronto anyways, it is the least subsidized public transit system in North America. 30% of it is subsidized, as opposed to places like New York, 64%, or in I think Los Angeles is almost 70%. So systematically and for years, the system has been starved. And it started with Mike Harris back in 1996, and subsequent governments afterwards have never had the courage to be able to address that shortfall. Prior to that, we saw every government, provincial government, meeting its obligations. So there has been at some point in time, some attempts, whether it's been McGuinty or perhaps I think Stephen Harper even tried to tinker with it a little bit, but never have we really found a resolution. And we will only see it get worse, regrettably, and I know everyone on this call knows that, unless the subsidies are actually brought up to a place where we can actually staff this system well, but also to make sure that the system is reliable and interconnected, so we can grow our city in a responsible way, and we can reduce that horrible moniker that we can now carry, which is the worst traffic congestion in North America or something like that. It's very, very bad, but it has everything to do with the fact that the system has been publicly starved.
So here's where I think we're at, folks. I don't know about how everybody else feels, but this is obviously going to be a challenge. But one of the things I know we can do, and we have the expertise on this call tonight and this conversation tonight, is we can start speaking the truth about what's actually happening in the transit system, not the platitudes that we heard from the minister or Michael Lindsay in charge of Infrastructure Ontario, that Ontario is somehow the envy of the world when we build things. I mean, look, let's be straight. Let's be straight with the people of Ontario. And I can tell you, when Kristen and Jill and I get back into that building, we sit in those green leather chairs, that is what we are going to do. We're going to be straight. And we're doing a report based on what everybody has said tonight. And we're going to be using that as a campaigning tool to protect the safety of transit workers, riders, but as I think, Kristen, you said very eloquently, the future of the system. I loved your recounting of your story of the TTC being your way of getting around. Certainly was mine when I was a student in the city for many years. So I don't see a whole lot of traffic in the Q&A, and I think it's because we're drinking in the knowledge. So maybe Jill, I'm going to throw to you some closing thoughts for the night.
Not exactly closing thoughts just yet, but I'm going to read into our record here this evening a statement from our local city councillor.
I'm sorry.
Josh Matlow. So on behalf of Josh, dear residents, I want to express my gratitude to our MPP for Toronto St. Paul's, Jill Andrew, and MPP Joel Harden for hosting this important event. It is critical that we hold Metrolinx and the Ontario government to account for the debacle that is the Eglinton Crosstown construction and the P3 agreement that has resulted in so many years of delays, dysfunction, and disrepair. As a community, we strongly support moving forward with projects that can expand and improve access to public transit. However, we equally expect that these projects be based on evidence, use public funds responsibly, and are designed and constructed well. Shamefully, residents along Eglinton have seen their quality of life directly impacted by how poorly this project has been managed. And small business owners have lost everything while far too often being treated simply like collateral damage. It is now clear that after many years of delays, while Metrolinx has been in court fighting with their own contractors, they still have no credible plan to complete this project. There's even evidence that they don't know how to complete it. This is simply not acceptable. I strongly support a public inquiry and believe one is necessary. It's necessary because the provincial government and Metrolinx must be held account. It's necessary so that the mistakes they've made are learned from, and even more communities aren't subject to this dysfunction as construction on the Ontario line and other projects begin. That is a point I know that myself and my colleagues in the official opposition, Joel and Kristen included, made a similar point. We got to learn from this, and we can't replicate the same issues with the Ontario line. Back to Matlow's letter, I appreciate that my friend Marvin Alfred, president of local ATU 113, is calling for transparency and accountability. Our local residents associations, our BIAs along Eglinton are too. And I'm very grateful to the Ontario NDP, the official opposition, for their leadership on this priority at Queen's Park. Josh Matlow, City Councillor for Toronto St. Paul's. He's certainly been a strong voice, a critical voice of P3s, and a critical voice of the mayor's inability to support all of our calls for the public inquiry. Thank you, Josh.
Jill, any other closing thoughts for the night?
My closing thought is this. I want to say thank you to everyone who participated this evening. We will absolutely continue this fight on the ground here in St. Paul's and also at Queen's Park. We want to keep our transit public. We want to ensure that it's publicly funded so it can operate safely, so workers can frankly leave for work and get home safe at night, feeling rewarded, feeling fully respected, and feeling dignified in their jobs. And we need residents to feel the same in their homes. We have lost a lot of the joy here along Eglinton. Some of it is quietly coming back. Construction is moving a bit. I want to give that credit, and frankly, that's the credit of advocates who've been raising their voice and applying pressure, but we still need that public inquiry. We need to know where our dollars went, where they are still going, because this isn't complete yet. It's not complete yet. And we need to ensure that we're learning from what's happened with the Ottawa LRT. And on a personal note, I've had a great pleasure working with Joel, a passionate leader in Queen's Park, with Kristen, with our entire official opposition, who have all been calling this out in their own respective ridings. And we've got to get this work done. So thank you everyone for joining us, and to folks in St. Paul's who may have had questions that weren't answered or have questions coming out of this, check us out, check me out at jillandrewmpp.ca, where we've got a petition calling for that public inquiry. Sign, and we will share it at Queen's Park at the top of my lungs. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you so much. I'm going to do what we should always do, and not in the night on my thought. I see my friend Brian's got his hand up. So Brian, after I finish with some administrative stuff, you get the last word of the night, my friend. As somebody, I have been drinking in your knowledge about the system. So hold on for a minute, because the last word goes to you. I do want to note that Ali has written in that people are disappointed with P3 projects. You're hearing that theme, Ali. I totally hear it. But Ali writes to the political representatives present, at what point should our government stop trying to untangle the Gordian knot of public-private partnerships and finally just sever these private companies from the relationship? It is a very good question. you're opposing Ali. And I think that's something we have to put into our report. How do we do that? How do we do that? What Sean told us about how difficult it is to even find out what the settlement is with RTG. Thank you for posing that question. We will fold that in. Paul Stanley writes, where we'll be able to see the report. You'll be able to see it at joelhardenmpp.ca and at Jill MPP Chill's website too. We are going to make sure that you have an opportunity to see this. And if you have any further questions, Jill already has told you to write that office, write the St. Paul office, write the Ottawa Centre office too. If something occurs to you later, we'll make sure that you're included. Noel is also writing about the fact that we've had a P3 debacle with our hospital, with the latest campus of the Ottawa Hospital. And Noel, you're absolutely right. You know where we're standing on that. We have been some of the lone voices actually asking for accountability and transparency. And Noel's asking for the hospital board to halt the P3 design of the mega hospital. And I want to make sure that point was mentioned here, so it's recorded in our report. Thank you, Noel, for doing that. Brian, as you see the next steps, what we do with this document, what's on your mind, brother? Bring us home.
I would like to say that the no accountability, we have already seen that in Toronto and the Eglinton Crosstown. Crosslinks has already sued Metrolinx twice.
Yes.
And
Hundreds
has
of
paid out
millions.
over $500,000. But the details of all the intricacies of the contract and the settlement have remained confidential due to the contract confidentiality. The big questions we need to be asking and pushing is, first of all, in my opinion, we need to get rid of Metrolinx. Metrolinx was designed by the McGuinty Liberals and originally had city councillors on the Metrolinx board. 2 years later, I believe it was in 2011, all the councillors were kicked off the board of Metrolinx. Since then, they've been just a political puppet, is all they've been. We've seen that when we had the Smart Track and the GO Train extensions and the approval of the Kirby stop, which was Stephen Del Duca's ward. Metrolinx couldn't justify any of that through their cost benefit analysis. Phil Verster's wage, the CEO, in 5 years has gone from 240,000 up to 876,000, I believe, a year. And no accountability. What has he done for that? P3s also started with the Highway 407. And we saw the Ontario government sold that off under the Conservative government. The P3 was actually started by David Peterson. Then it was continued with the UP Express. That was a P3. And that Union Pearson Express SNC Lavalin had the full design, operate, build, finance, maintain contract, and they walked away from that quarter way through construction. And it was left up to the Ontario government to try and finish that before the Pan Am Games. So again, we've seen time and time again, private companies be getting rich off these projects, and when they don't, they walk away from them. The fares on the UP Express when it opened up was $57 a ride. And nobody rode it because it was too expensive. Because transit in Toronto is a public service. It cannot be profit. And we're seeing Doug Ford do this with our healthcare system right now. He's underfunding it, creating a crisis, blaming the unions, enacting Bill 124, and then preaching privatization as the solution. And it's happening here in transit, and it's a disaster. And we need to all educate ourselves to be able to fight the fight and bring this to light, especially in the media, and gain attention in the communities. Thanks.
Amen, Brian. Well done. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for being with us tonight. My goodness, the expertise on this call, from the workers in the system to the riders to the advocates, to the local municipal voices. This is inspiring. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Erica, for making this space possible. This is what people don't see, is all the folks working hard to make community spaces, promote them, make them possible. Get ready. This is going to be a hot report. It's going to drop. Marvin, I see your hand up. I can't not recognize that. Over to you.
I'm excited. I just want to know if we can all come back here to do this again tomorrow. I'm ready. Let's go. I'm ready. I won't even leave my office. I won't even.
We might hold you to it.
I'll just wait.
Well, it's just the beginning. You know, it's just the beginning. We got a lot of trouble to cause the legislature. We sit back in those green leather chairs, if not mistaken, February 21st, right, Chris?
February 21st. February 21st.
To get ready to rumble. Tone, you got a final part and thought?
Yeah, just one last thing to say is, you know, all governments at all different levels talk about the importance of small business, and P3 is anything but. A friend of mine used to bid on hospital projects, and it would cost his firm $2 million to put in a bid. And if they lost a job, you know, that was $2 million that came out of their business that they had to work at. So it's, you know, when we think about small businesses, engine of the economy and all of that, you know, P3s are totally against that. It's all about massive big business, offshore corporations, shareholder profits, and it does nothing to support small businesses. Not only the impact that it has on the communities in Toronto that have gone bankrupt and small businesses that have been impacted, but they're frozen out of doing any of the actual work and the design and the construction. And it's bad for everybody. Especially when you get to these massive multi-billion-dollar projects lumped together. I mean, I think something like a third of our Ottawa's phase 2 LRT isn't even related to the LRT. It's highway bridges and road widenings. You know, and that's just insane that we're throwing all that stuff in there just to make it quick and easy. I gotta go. Thank you, everybody. It's been fantastic.
Eric, hold on, Eric. You want to get in here? Go
Just quick closing words. As somebody who's driven transit for 35 years, I've been a transit operator here in Hamilton, and I could tell you, passengers want one thing: they want the bus or the train or whatever they're riding to come on time, and they want it to be safe and they want it to be affordable. All three things are three things that have not been delivered under P3s, and it's time to end it. And it's time to go back to funding the public transit system so that it can do the job that we've always done. That's it.
That should be the name.
Thank you, Eric. That's it.
Look, everybody, take care. Jill, thank you.
No, thank you, Joel. Thanks for having us.
And Marvin, you ready for good trouble?
Indeed I am. Indeed I am. Just make sure you have bail money for me and I'm ready to go.
All right. All right. Everybody take care.
I've got some for you.